Alyssa, Steve, we are just turning our systems on and about to let people in, but we should be online and live. Can you both hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to give everybody 60 seconds to click on their links, do their sign-ups, realise they've forgotten their passwords and all the things that happen to all of us. And then what we'll do is we'll introduce you to people that are listening, and then we will head on into the Q&A session. We've got, certainly from me, I've got a collection of questions I'm really looking forward to asking you both, and we'll introduce what the session's about in a second. And then typically, for anyone that's listening already, and for the two of you, as you know, people will post questions throughout the webinar. So for anyone listening now, if you've got a question before we even start, you should feel free to post it. But as we go along, stick your questions in on the question chat, and I will make sure we either weave them in as I know they become relevant, or we will aim to leave time at the end to take all of them. And if not, we'll be able to follow up with you. So off the back of my filibustering for about 60 to 90 seconds, that feels like a good enough time for people who have set up their laptops, got a glass of water and kick things off. So if you're both ready to go, I'm going to introduce what we're talking about, introduce the two of you, and then head on into the good stuff, which is the questions. All good? Perfect.
Great.
Well, look, both of you, thank you for joining. For people on the line and for people listening to us on the podcast, we're doing a session today called Mastering Offboarding for Network Success. Now, as we all know, anyone listening, that moment of saying goodbye to an employee, how you do it, it's a pivotal touch point in managing their transition into being an alumni, in order to maintain a connection that represents long-term value for both parties, I guess. But should it really be a goodbye? Should we be thinking about it and referring to it as offboarding? Should we be thinking about it as goodbye for now, but we hope we'll see you again? Is it you're no longer an employee on payroll, but you're still part of the family, essentially an employee, just not currently working for us? So lots of things to discuss today. Alyssa Dominion is the Global Alumni Relations Lead at LEK Consulting, spearheading their strategic initiatives to connect and empower the firm's growing network of alumni worldwide. She's previously worked in hospitality and higher ed in Canada, Australia, and France. So Alyssa, welcome.
Thank you, Emma. Great to be here.
Steve, ditto, we're thrilled to have you, Alyssa. And Steve was LinkedIn's first Chief Talent Officer and is now a talent advisor to leaders, organizations across the globe, including Airbnb, Salesforce, Manchester United, not my football team, but I have to say it, EDP, the City of Lisbon, the list goes on. In 2021, Steve published a book on the future of work titled Workquake, Embracing the Aftershocks of COVID-19 to Create a Better Model of Working. They're joining us today to explore the importance of delivering the right message to a departing employee at the right time, and delve into the whys, the hows of how adopting a company-wide strategy to retain the relationship really matters. So look, perhaps I could kick it off with, what are we talking about when we use the term offboarding? Is it the exit interview? Is it more? You'll both have a different perspective. So maybe we will kick off with Alyssa. What is offboarding for you?
Yeah, well, when I read Steve's book, I realized that offboarding was probably actually the first day of the employee. You want to set them up for success and hope they'll stay in touch, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. It's really part of building the culture. But if I look at it from the alumni relations point of view and what I can actually impact, I realized that as an alumni team, we were meeting our alumni once they had left the firm or on their last day. And from benchmarking, speaking to people, I realized there was a time before that when they were still at the firm and willing to receive our information, where we had much more leverage and power to get the right messages across. So that's why I started looking at offboarding.
So offboarding for you is basically anything from onboarding plus 1 day.
Exactly.
As a result, you might be thinking what Steve has to say because you've taken it from his book, but that's good to hear what your definition is. Steve, has Alyssa covered what you think? Is she plagiarizing?
Plagiarizing is legal. Once you finish school, plagiarizing is completely legal. No, I think, you know, what's really behind the genesis of this conversation is the biggest challenge that I see for leaders today is that they can't find the people with the skills they need as fast as they want. And when they do, they can't keep them. And when I think about offboarding, I think about it's a reframe of the relationship between employers and employees, one where we care about an employee beyond just when they work for us, that it is a relationship that carries forward. And I'm not sure, I'm not in love with the term offboarding. Some sort of like, you are a part of our general community. We're going to send you out there, but we still want to keep in touch, and we still want to care about your career. So it's, but that's how I think about it, is just a reframing of the relationship, one that doesn't end at the end of employment, just begins a different phase of the relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, we think about this a lot, and I often call it effectively alumni as being offboarding, whatever. It's actually like a career co-pilot, and it's not just about helping somebody to get a job. We're basically going to say we're going to stay with you through your whole working life cycle. So as you say, offboarding sounds a bit abrupt, and maybe the word itself is not terribly healthy. But in terms of offboarding and how it's done in most companies, of course, look, Alyssa, you're at LEK, so we definitely want to hear from you about what happens today with you, but also what you see in the wider market. I'd love to hear, how would you, and let's start with you, Steve, because you're an external advisor, so it's probably easier to comment. How would you characterize the current state of offboarding in most companies? So does that process typically sit with the right team? What roles should be involved? And how directly should it actually be employee experience? Where do you think it sits?
Gosh, it's all over the place. But if I were to characterize offboarding today, it's haphazard. It's not, there's no strategy behind it. There's no enterprise objective towards it. It's the result of an enlightened leader who cares about staff having a relationship with some people who leave. It's not sponsored necessarily by the company. And that's at a very, very general level, right? That it's just something that it results when you have a mature leader who's really thinking more broadly and does care. And we all have leaders from our past that we still keep in touch with, that are still mentors and coaches. And those are the kind of people. But very rarely do I see an organization really put a lot of thought behind it.
And I guess you're talking about those relationships that we all hold dear about someone we used to work with, which in itself, much like alumni, can be quite hard to replicate, right? That loveliness of your favorite boss or the person you sit next to staying in touch, really hard to replicate at scale, but a helpful perspective. And Alyssa, maybe from you, look, I know it sits with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about how it's evolved at LEK and some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the main idea from it is it does the job. It does the job, but it actually does the job in the old sense of the term, where you collect your equipment and you secure your data. What I've tried to do at LEK is, and this is what I do when I approach alumni relations, I look at ROE. So how do we get our return on engagement is through reach, organized programming, and empowering. When I was looking at reach, how do we increase the number of alumni we're in contact with so they're aware of what we offer? Organized programming, whether it's events, inspirational talk, career support, knowledge sharing, and empowering. How do we empower alumni to get involved themselves? And how do we empower champions inside the company to help us with word of mouth, for example? So pretty much, how do you use your ecosystem to go further, right? And so based on this, I looked at our reach, the first part. And our reach, we've got about 65% of new alumni who connect to our portal. So a platform where you can find event details, online directory, a great tool like Enterprise Alumni for alumni managers around the world. But we were doing it individual by individual. And my question then became, how do I think about it more strategically? And is there a critical touch point in the employee journey where I can act much further? And that led me to partnering with our HR teams. So it did the job, and I'm trying to move to something where it actually is empowering our alumni and our teams internally.
And I listened to that, Alyssa and Steve, and I think to myself, like a lot of things, it's about time, money, and sponsorship, right? And typically, in my experience, offboarding, which we'll call it for the purposes of today, is under-resourced. It's often a part of someone's job, as you'll know, Alyssa. And it's, you talked about getting the ecosystem on board, and that's quite challenging. Sometimes you might have some people who really think it's important, and others who it just isn't at all. What we're looking to discuss today, I think, is best practices and what we should be aspiring to. So in terms of offboarding success, for want of a better word, what should the exiting employee be getting from offboarding? What should success look like in terms of the benefit to the organisation? So maybe, Alyssa, you can talk about that, because you think about it all day long from a very tactical perspective. And Steve, maybe you can give us a sort of bigger picture about the journey and what you've been hoping it would look like.
From the exiting employee point of view, I think two things: clarity and confidence. Clarity on the next steps, what services are available to them, how can they come back, making that actually really clear. And then confidence is more around the recognition piece. Recognizing employees can go a long way. Thank you for your contribution is something that was not in our exit emails, for example. So I've added that at the top of our offboarding templates. Recognition in what they've achieved, and recognizing how they can continue to help the brand. Sharing data in our global survey, for example, will go into more practical things. But yeah, clarity and confidence, in my opinion.
And do you need, Alyssa, the help of all of the people across the business in order to do that, right? Because if you need to say thank you, in a business like yours that has a lot of people, to say thank you very much for doing X, Y, and Z, it's just not possible. You can't know what everybody's doing. So that's what you're aspiring for, right? But that relies on everyone's line manager.
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting topic there. There's things that I can't control, right? And there's things that I can do to ensure minimal level service. And I think that's what I'm aspiring for, is I will not be able to replace every HR conversation if they're away, but if we can have a global alignment on what the minimum is in terms of clarity, like checklists and thank yous and a global survey, what is the data we want to capture, then that is going to help us be more successful. And I think the impact is going to be that our alumni, because it's a perception, right? When employees leave, it's the way they feel and how they feel a bit after. That's what I want to impact. They might have had a great time at LEK, but I want to make sure that that actually stays with them.
So a warm touch point, a consistent touch point, are the sort of keys for you as you scale up. And Steve, what does a great version of this look like? Or in fact, maybe what did you perceive and conceive was really how this should be done, even if you don't even see it today?
Well, I do see it, fortunately for me, from one of my former employers. And I feel very fortunate to have a little bit of a hand in helping build the foundations for that to take place at LinkedIn. But LinkedIn will reach out to me. So just for those people who are wanting sort of building an alumni program 101, these are some of the things that LinkedIn's done that I think are just brilliant. And they're so low cost, such low hanging fruit, so easy to do. It really is just a matter of, do you want to do it or don't you want to do it? First is they'll reach out to me randomly and say, we've got a new product feature. We would love for you to test and give us feedback. So I'm like, really? Wow, you want my opinion? That's great. Steve, would you come back and coach an executive who's thinking of leaving because you've left and you've done some interesting things and you've had some good experiences and some bad experiences? Would you be willing to share that and inviting me back into the community? Steve, here's a free feature on LinkedIn that we're going to give you for the rest of your working life. We're going to give you LinkedIn Pro for free. And all that costs LinkedIn is it's probably a little bit of potential lost revenue, but just a flip of a switch and some coding, and I've got it for the rest of my life. So I feel like they care about me. They're interested in me. And then we also have every month or sometimes twice a month, Steve, we have a featured alumni a month that we're going to talk about. We have a luncheon once a quarter. We would love for you to come, and they rotate the lunches around the world. And that's just, all about what Alyssa's saying, which is fostering community. And it does take, I do believe it does take the whole organization to sort of rethink it and sort of say, yeah, let's care about people for their whole career, not just when they work for us, because they could give us great ideas. They could give us great insight. We've already invested so much in them. Why don't we continue to mine that and have them be an ambassador for us? And one of the first ways that I saw this really work to our advantage was right after we went public, in 2011, we lost one of our best data scientists. And back in that time, and I'm sure still today, that is gold. You do not want to lose a data scientist. And he was our best recruiter for technical talent. He was charismatic. He was good at his job. He was a good leader. And this was really going to be a devastating blow. So when he resigned, after we got over the initial, like, oh no, we approached him and said, what can we do to sponsor you in your next phase of your career? Would you like us to invest in your new company? Like, we want to be a part of it because we believe in you. And he became a better recruiter for us after he left than he was when he was with us. He would send a lot of people say, listen, I'm not there anymore, but I had a great experience. I'm continuing to have a great experience. And those to me are some really, really simple pieces that can pay massive dividends for your business, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up on that before we go to some more questions. I mean, the do good things and good things will come back to you probably resonates with everyone here on both a personal and professional level. We get loads of questions on webinars and, in the course of our business, and customers and prospects who always want to talk about how can I get the budget, how can I get the ROI? And of course, that is something that is quite hard to, you can't articulate the value of that. You can't say, well, if you do this, then you're likely to get a happier person who does wonderful things for the business. So it's a really hard thing to articulate that magic. And I mean, look, I know you and your dog were featured in the LinkedIn Alumni Network last year, that we are very, very proud to power their software. But to sort of pick up on your point, has the Alumni Network made a difference to that? Because the things you mentioned were like very personal touch points, but also, I mean, I remember the launch and they had that super fun candle and matches, and like their swag box was super fun and really, really well thought out. Does it make a difference? I mean, does the consistency of touch points from something that is a little bit more at scale make a difference to you?
I think it does. I really think it does. I'm also an alumni of Cisco Systems, and the big difference, and I had a wonderful experience there, wonderful, 6 great years, worked in Singapore for a few years, worked in the US on mergers and acquisition. It was wonderful. But what's different about the Cisco Alumni Network is it's entirely run and organized by the alumni. And because we all had such a great experience, we want to continue to connect and share that goodwill. And so it's just it's a miss for me because the organization sort of, it doesn't engage in that. And that's, to me, I think a lot of organizations have that, and they're missing out on something. And it doesn't necessarily require budget. Yes, it does require someone to sort of help curate it and focus it and mine it, but it doesn't need it. It would work better that way, I think. But that's sort of the difference. What I see, a lot of organizations, people have great experiences, and the alumni just self-organize, right? And you could go on LinkedIn groups, by the way, and see such and such alumni from such and such company. There's thousands of them, but is the organization engaging with them? Usually not, right? And it's just
that's true. That's absolutely. And actually, we have a question from Brian here about what are your thoughts on formal alumni groups on LinkedIn, managed and so there's 2 types. As you say, I often will go to an alumni group to have a look, and it'll be 15,000 people, but the person that is the admin left there 11 years ago and was like, was there for a year, which I always think is just, it's wonderful, but it always surprises me that, knowing the temperament of a corporate, that people would quite like to sort of own or be part of that narrative. If it's owned and facilitated by the firm, I think it's different, but obviously LinkedIn groups, it's harder to do something personal. It's not targeted. LinkedIn obviously have their own one as well as our software, but you can't slice and dice. It's a bit more of a broadcast. Certainly, I think those things matter, but it does always surprise me. It surprises and delights in some ways to see that there are LinkedIn groups where they are of size and scale, where they are run by people that left years ago. But you're right, the company's not in the picture. Even if they're not owning that group, it does beg the question, don't you want to speak to those 1, 10, 5,000 people? It feels like there's, Reid Hoffman said when we did a webinar last year with him and Chris Yao, he said there's vertical solutions and horizontal solutions. There's stuff to do stuff light touch, then there's ways to dig in. And I think all the ways to dig in are important. A LinkedIn group, 1-to-1 if you can, but also the consistent point that Alyssa said to everybody. And actually, it's not hard to do that, a minimum viable, it's not hard to do a small amount of that, right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about mistakes. So what are typical mistakes, missed opportunities, and how do these companies, how does that impact company culture and future talent acquisition? I mean, we've already discussed one, which is there are corporates who don't take the opportunity to feel the magic that alumni have, that nostalgia, such as your Cisco example. Are there any other mistakes you see in offboarding and exiting? Because one of my questions to you would be, lots of people are asked surveys on their way out. Are they honest when they're on their way out about how they feel about things? Well, noted question then. We'll pass to Alyssa, and then we know Steve's already given us a shake of the head.
I'll do a shake of yes. I think, Emma, on top of what you just said of caring, which I want to just put it out there, I think it is fair enough for HR teams to wonder, why should we invest time in leavers? They've invested a lot in attracting them and retaining them. But we all agree that actually it does impact the firm globally. So on top of that, I think there's two things. Finding the right tone is quite difficult. You can't be too friendly. You can't be too formal. There's going to be bonus calculations involved, or you want honest feedback, as you just said in your survey. So it's really finding the right tone is actually quite difficult. And the other one I'd say is collecting, analyzing, and actually acting upon data. So if I can share a story here, one of our HR teams has done a great job at gathering more data from team members leaving. And she shared with me that 70% of team members had said they were willing to come back as boomerangs. Considering boomerang recruits is an objective for alumni relations in most alumni and corporate strategy firms, we save on recruitment, we save on training costs, they impact the culture. Knowing that is a piece of gold for me. And I know that my consulting staff on average is going to return after about 19 months. Core services is going to return after 3 years. There's a critical message I can deliver at the critical time if I'm aware of that. But had I not spent time working on this offboarding and partnering with our people teams and acting upon data, I wouldn't have known. So collecting and acting upon the data, I think, is a really big one for me.
Awesome. Thank you. And Steve, some thoughts from you?
Yeah, so some typical mistakes that I see, and again, I'm coming to you live from one of the most litigious countries in the world, United States, where it's always about what the lawyer thinks. And I think this is where I think a lot of organizations get it wrong. I've seen alumni connections even from places where people were terminated involuntarily. And some mistakes that I see organizations make repeatedly is following the legal advice and ending the relationship on, quote, legally safe terms versus really good human terms, and being really harsh and cutting systems off before people are even notified and they're finding out the wrong way. There was during the pandemic, there's a great story of an organization that got it right, and probably much to the dismay of the employment lawyers that were, talking about how to do this. And that was Airbnb. When the pandemic happened, no one was using Airbnb. The business was facing a dramatic shortfall in revenue, and they had to let a lot of people go. And they did it in such an incredible way that the affected people became more loyal and more engaged because of how well they were treated, and how the company turned the entire recruiting team into an outplacement firm, how the engineering team matched every departing employee to every job that was open on the planet and sponsored that. And that was the number one objective of the company, was to give a soft landing to all the departing people. And that was, in defiance to, don't talk to people, don't say anything. The lawyers, we could get into trouble. And I think that's the biggest mistake that I see is people, trying to take the safe legal path versus recognizing this is the beginning of something that could be a new revenue opportunity for us, a new joint venture with a new firm, or a returning boomerang employee. And that's probably the most repeated mistake that I see, is just following strict legal approach versus really being thoughtful around what's the long game here, right?
Yeah, I think I remember that post that Brian, the CEO, did when he announced all of those. And I guess, maybe that one of the nuances of that was COVID was a very, very real reason that people had to make changes. And obviously we knew that Airbnb was going to be a massive, we're going to have massive problems because people simply weren't able to open their homes. And it's a bit more challenging, I think, when there are mass redundancies or when there are economic issues, but certainly there's a right and wrong way, right? We can all remember examples of some Silicon Valley companies over the last year or so that people turned on their laptop to find they couldn't log in. That's can never be, in my opinion, a good way to do things, legal or non-legal. And I guess it also points to things like we often speak to retailers who are customers, and they'll talk about people that we debate who should be allowed into the alumni network. And I remember a particular few cases which were highlighted, and effectively the use case was, we've got students that are working for us in retailers, retail stores, supermarkets, and sometimes they don't turn up for work, or they're unreliable, or they came in at a big night out, they came in an hour late. Completely unacceptable as an employee, and I totally understand and respect that. But if you are a large corporate that has a lifelong demand for talent, probably if you're a 19-year-old, I worked at McDonald's when I was 16, although in fairness, I was a very diligent employee. But people at 16 or 18 or 21, you're not necessarily grown up and as responsible as you ought to be. And 5 or 10 years later, you might be an amazing employee. So why reject those? I think, we all agree, right? There's a human way to do this, and it points to who is a regrettable loss and who is not, I think. Maybe we could talk about the roles of different departments in offboarding as well. And I can see loads of questions about this. Before which, by the way, I must say, Steve is answering some questions as we go along. Not everybody can see this, but Anne asked a question, which is one we get every time. I did say about return on investment. What's the best way to show leaders the untapped potential of an alumni network? And Steve's answer is the best answer anyone's ever given. So I'm actually going to ask you to attend every webinar, and it was send them the link to this podcast. So that's an excellent answer, but we can help you with more thinking if you need to afterwards. Brilliant, Steve. So a question about who should be involved. What role does communications play in this? Because we know that HR is people. HR sometimes have recruiter marketing, employee experience, employer branding. Can you both give some thought as to who else should be or must be, in fact, at the table? Because to me, offboarding is comms, which doesn't necessarily have to mean it has to come from comms, but it's the way you say things. Thoughts from both of you. Alyssa, should we start with you?
Yeah, I think HR definitely needs to be involved because they're a neutral force. Direct managers do play a big part in that. And I have heard people say they were a bit disappointed if they hadn't heard from a manager, or if someone else hadn't reached out. If they've spent 10, 15, 20 years at the firm and they're only in touch with HR, well, in some cases, they don't feel like that's enough. So some kind of senior leadership, it often social departments can organize a lunch. I know one of our offices does thank you lunches and celebrates people when they leave, which I think was a great idea. Why not? The thing I'd say in terms of communication, in my opinion, is consistency is key. Word of mouth is a massive risk. So I've spoken to people who heard this person had reached out to them, or they had heard from this person, but their experience wasn't the same. So in terms of communication, consistency really is key, as well as tailored messaging. Steve was mentioning voluntary and involuntary departures, and I think we should address all of those and actually speak to all of those.
Steve, your thoughts?
Hang on, I've got a little sound issue here. I'm going to go back to my better microphone.
Sometimes the best spec and the biggest microphone doesn't necessarily work the best.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
You can.
So here's how I would do this. I wouldn't start by framing who should be involved in the building an alumni network if I didn't already feel that we had a good relationship with our employees. Okay, so for example, every organization I've ever worked for says, we really care about our people, but we're going to put you on a 90-day probation when you start, and hopefully you'll make it. And we're going to probably do a criminal background check on you, and we're going to watch you and see if you're logging on your keys from home. If you're already not treating people with dignity and respect and trust, don't bother with an alumni. Like, you're wasting your time. Okay, you've got bigger
problems. Oh, we lost you, and we can't lip read. We want to hear it straight from your mouth.
All right. I just said something. Okay. I just said something incredibly brilliant. If you don't have a trusting relationship with your staff, generally speaking, of transparency, communication, and relatively, good engagement, you're wasting your time trying to build an alumni network. Don't even bother. Focus on the folks who are there. And then if you can build that advocacy, then you can expand. And I would, rather than being prescriptive about specific departments, I would try to get my senior executive leadership team to recognize, do you all agree people are going to stay in organizations less tenure in the future than ever before? Yes. Okay. So people are going to be here shorter. So that means we're going to have more alumni than we've ever had. Should we go Tony Soprano on them and tell them, when you quit, you're dead to us? Or should we say, we want a long-term relationship with you. And if the answer is yes, then you go tell every department, what can we do to change how we operate so that we're nurturing that community? And that's everyone: communications, public relations, the people who are doing new hire orientation, everything. Because everyone's got to be involved. And the people who touch the employee experience the most are the frontline managers. Like, they're the ones that, let's start building that alumni network in the recruiting process, right? Which is, Alyssa talked about. It's like the first chapter of my book. Like, you got to start building that alumni network when you're recruiting people, not when you're letting them go, right? That's when it starts, I believe, because you're framing a long-term relationship. That's how I say it. But every department should be involved. And I think rather than being prescriptive about how and what you should do, is sort of say, what can we all do to make that an outcome that's really going to help the organization, if you believe it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the converted, I think, to be honest with you. And I mean, actually, it's interesting because Vincent's asked a question, which is, I work on the secondment teams for my company, and I'd be keen on all of our views on how to approach offboarding for secondees, who will obviously be returning to their home organization. I think that we probably would all agree that, but they spent time at your company. They were a participant in your ecosystem. Why wouldn't you include them? Does anybody, do either of you differ in that view? Because maybe, Alyssa, you've got criteria for being part of your alumni network, or can everybody join?
Everybody can join. And I think from a secondee perspective, you're bringing, just like boomerangs, you're bringing skills back to the company, and that is very valuable to the company. So I'd encourage managers to actually acknowledge that and maybe try and use those. I'm not quite sure how yet. Secondments is definitely on my radar, but I think, yeah, celebrate them as well. Can I react to Steve's comments earlier?
Of course.
I absolutely agree with you, Steve, on paper. We need to tell everyone that it's great that we have set up employees for success, and that one day they'll leave and we want to stay in touch. As Emma said, you're preaching, you're converted. I love alumni relations, right? However, we're speaking, so I work in a consulting firm where we have over 200 partners. The company is part of them. They have, it's almost part of their identity. They're proud of the company. So actually losing someone hurts. And not everyone has that perception or is willing to celebrate people as much as we do. So it's kind of, from an operational point of view, it is quite a challenge to actually get everyone on board. And so I've started partnering with HR teams, and I hope one day I'll be able to use more departments and get them on board. But it's actually a challenge, I find.
Yeah, I don't think we're at a place where there's unanimous ubiquity of, yeah, this is definitely the right thing to do, because we have a lot of legacy perception that, and this is, I think, one of the inhibitors, we're talking about, Emma, some of the challenges or mistakes is, I think technology is poking a hole in the belief that for us to have a successful operation, people have to stay here a long time. Microsoft, less than 3-year tenure. Google, less than 3-year tenure. On and Apple, less than 4 years tenure. Like on and on and on. Some of the most valuable companies in the world are not thriving because they have so many people who've been there 30, 40 years. And the development cycle, particularly in technology, is a lot shorter than 7, 8, 9 years. So that is one of the reasons why I think we have resistance. We have a lot of leaders that were all trained like we were, that, loyalty is the key to a successful operation, and that means people have to stay here a long time. And I'm saying people today are loyal to learning, not necessarily to a company. And so let's make them better even when they're gone, right? And that's why, at LinkedIn, we've got a seminar for alumni this month. Awesome. That's great. Feed me and continue to feed me. But I totally agree, Alyssa, it's really hard, and it's uphill sometimes because people are like, no. They quit after 1 year. What? And then on the other side of the coin, there's companies like Chipotle, which is a fast food chain here in the States, which tells people in new hire orientation, we know we're not your dream job. We're fast food. We're part of your journey. We want it to be the best part of your journey. But, we know that we're going to educate you while you're here, but we know that you're not going to be here forever. That's okay, because we want to help you get to wherever it is you want to go. Right. And I think that's that's enlightened leadership. Obviously, it's fast food. And what was the turnover? The last I heard at McDonald's, the turnover was 400%. And that was a great year. Yeah, in some of the in stores, and that just means someone's going to again.
We got to 400% turnover, and just when that nugget was about to come out, we lost you.
And so, and that means someone's going to stay about 4 or 5 months. So, that requires, I think, and some organizations are really good at this, let's re-engineer jobs. So success doesn't mean you're here 5 years and then we will listen to you, right? It's, we've got a ramp up time, a really fast ramp up time to make you productive. If I know you're probably only going to be here 4 or 5 months, I'm going to train you really, really quickly, and find a way to make the job satisfying as fast as I can, and then keep in touch with you, and maybe you'll come back. But it is a challenge, and that's why we're having this conversation, right? Because we don't have full buy-in around the world.
Yeah, and that's a challenge that kind of is part of the questions that I can see being listed, right? People are like, how do I tell my boss this? How do I tell my CEO this? Melinda's asked a question, which is, what suggestions do we have for bringing HR and hiring managers along into the alumni value proposition? And I'll preface that with the following. I obviously speak to a lot of talent leaders. And over the years, I hear a lot, we don't do enough for our employees. We need to focus on them. So we can't think about people that are leaving or have left. And by the way, there's logic in everything. People have only so much time and resources. But actually completely ignoring that group to me doesn't make sense. So my response to Melinda would be statistics about boomerang hires and the impact they have. They're quicker to hire, stay longer, more productive. They're typically not a bad employee, which is very damaging if you hire someone that's not right. But do the two of you have some suggestions in the context of the conversation we just had about suggestions for bringing HR into why alumni matters?
Yeah, I will say, as a recovering human resources executive of 40 years in the profession, what I would say is people who are not in HR should appreciate that, generally speaking, HR is underfunded, overburdened, putting out fires constantly, and not respected. And so that puts you in a state of disadvantage where, like, unless this is going to solve an immediate problem that I have right now, I do not have time for this. And so what I would say is, don't wait for HR to figure it out. It probably should sit there in some capacity, but if you really believe in it, don't wait for HR, go do it. Start something on your own, and then start showing HR the value for them. I think what HR's biggest challenge, and this is a highly overgeneralized comment, but I think HR's biggest challenge is finding people right now, and also recognizing skills. If we can't find people fast, we better recognize what skills we need, and maybe we can grow it and mine it internally. And people may have skills that we don't know about. So trying to understand that the anatomy of skills is probably the hottest thing that I'm talking to people about right now, because artificial intelligence is throwing sort of a wrench into the whole machine around what's our recognition, what skills should people build. So, and that's another burden that HR has had it thrown on its plate unexpectedly. So what I would say is, go, start doing some stuff, and then showing the success, and then going out in the world, in the community, talking to you, Emma, and your team, and showing success stories. Because if recruiting is a big problem for you, this is a great support to help minimize that pain point, I believe.
And Alyssa, I read a report yesterday that said 75% of companies across the globe are and will continue to experience a global talent shortage. Is it, in terms of Melinda's question, is alumni for you an important source of boomerang hires?
Yeah, so that was in my pitch to the HR teams when I presented our offboarding recommendation. Boomerang hires impact the culture, save cost, right? The way I did it is I actually volunteered to do more career support for HR teams. So I was taking one burden off them by speaking to people who had not yet decided they were going to leave, but exploring other career options. And by supporting the HR teams, it allowed me to actually know what leavers wanted better, right, as well. So it was kind of giving me data and giving me feedback while supporting the HR team and having an open door. And then my recommendation was based on 4 pillars. And because people team faced barriers to delivering an optimum experience, our leavers were leaving unsure of how to engage. So the 4 pillars were guidance for leavers, team efficiency, piloting programs for nurtured communities and branding. And that came from 12 action items. But to answer the question of Melinda, team efficiency, my recommendation on team efficiency was specifically for HR. So for example, we designed a consistent and branded offboarding email with a global survey that's going to give them instant data. They don't have to go back and analyze it. They don't have to think about which attachments to do. Everything is embedded within the document. So I'm making HR's life easier. The other thing I think is team efficiency is also we're giving them a nice message, right? When people leave, HR is often going to be talking about, give me your laptop, give me your pass, here's your bonus calculation. We might disagree on that. But actually, the Alumni Network is a really nice service that we're offering to people. So it's kind of giving the HR teams a nice message to end their checklist, their HR checklist. So I think if you can position it like that, it can help convince HR teams.
Yeah, I mean, I always think to myself, I mean, there's lots of things we're all saying which resonate. We all have a way that we think about them. One of the things, you know, your comment, Steve, about saying thanks, I always say, why would you say thanks, bye? You would never take something you spent millions or billions on and throw it into the trash can. You know, that would be such a waste of an investment. I just can't get my head around it. But the other thing I can't get my head around points to your point, Alyssa, which is companies spend millions, billions on tech, on every single stage of the life cycle, right? Sourcing people, hiring people, nurturing people, recruiting them, onboarding them, making them happy, upskilling them, you know, retaining them. And then again, it gets to that thanks bye point. So my other point, I think, for HR, although I know, you know, Steve's point about HR always being underfunded, under budget, and can it sort this fire out now, is it's just, I really believe that Alumni Tech is that last piece of the people journey. And, and it goes to that thing I said at the beginning, which is I also think that alumni are your employees. They're just your employees that aren't currently working for you. Because to everyone's tenure point, I mean, you know, I went on the weekend to the shopping mall in where the McDonald's is that I worked more years ago than I'm going to say on this webinar so that I can't age myself. Very long time ago. You know, and I still felt happy and I wanted to go get something, and it's just like, it doesn't leave you. So I just think that it's just like that last, if you've got software for every stage of the journey, or if you've got something you use to enable every stage of the journey, then you can't do the last bit with a spreadsheet. And, you know, I guess, Alyssa, your point has got to be consistency.
Right, and that I think makes advocacy easier if you've got some technological support. Can I take a second, Emma and Alyssa, to sort of expand what this alumni concept a little bit? In the U.S., because of the high cost of healthcare, there's a very strong effort made in most companies to draw a line between an employee and a temporary or an independent contractor. And I see these people as part of your community too. And, you know, in the US, can't invite them to the holiday party because that could see blurring the lines. And then if we blur the lines, then we're going to have to pay for their health care. And then look at all the companies that we employ, whether it's Glovo, DoorDash, Instacart, Uber, Lyft. We have so many businesses that are providing a service, and those aren't employees mostly. And to me, that's really interesting. Are you know, how do you perceive them as a business, and what investments are you making in them? For example, I've spent a lot of time with one of the companies that I just listed saying, you know, are you training them? What are you doing to invest in them? What are you doing to make them better? And if you do that, and if you help pay for their healthcare, for example, or give them, you know, negotiate a group rate so that they can go on their own and buy it, but you've negotiated a group rate discount, maybe you're going to get the better drivers. Maybe you're going to get the better, you know, people, and that's going to serve you well, right? That's what I'm talking about. Like, don't just think about employee, think about the whole community of people adding value in your organization, right? And I think that I would consider those people alumni. Maybe some people online are going to think that I've lost it and I'm a little bit crazy, but those are people that could, you know, the two largest sources of hires in most companies are employee referral and temp contractor conversion to full-time hire. And so how you treat those communities, I think, are really going to be valuable for you to consider.
And, you know, and that point about value. So we had our alums conference a few weeks ago, and we had a very unusual spot that we filled from somebody from Schroders who came and talked to us about how they value the cost of human capital. Effectively, if companies do HR well, it can add to the value of the company, which I'd heard someone talking about, and I'd met the team leader, and I suddenly thought to myself, well, if companies do offboarding and alumni well, then that also adds to the value of the company, because those people will, you know, repay you in kindness and coming back and working for you, revenue, whatever else it is. So I think that, you know, it kind of goes to Melinda's question, which is, I can see, I can touch, and I can smell on the timeline that there is going to start to be a way to calculate this, which I know is going to make it easier for people to be able to put proper resources to this. Because, Alyssa, I'm sure you may not want to say it on here, but I'm sure you must be under-resourced. I'm sure you could do with more resources and could do a lot more with a lot more help. And I just think that that valuing it point is very hard. You know, when we talk to people about, you know, well, how can I get budget to do this, or what we'll come up with, you know, something about boomerangs, and we'll look at their business and we can make some assumptions, or we can think about the lifetime value of one customer, or whatever else it might be. But it's so hard to talk about that magic that you're talking about, Steve, and put a number and a calculation on it. So I'm super excited that that's coming, but it still feels 3-4 years away, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious. I think we all want to, you know, throw something at the people that don't listen to us, to be honest with you. We've got time only for a few more questions, and there are questions in the group here. But maybe we could talk a little bit about designing a system, whether it's, you know, whether it's tech, which is what we do for a living, but designing a system for offboarding. Steve, I'm going to start with you, because you've been thinking about this a long time, or certainly longer than Alyssa. When you used to think about like how you would design this, is there any advice you can give? And is there anything that you think technology sort of massively brings to the table? Because as you said, everyone can start something.
Yeah, I think we're learning now, especially because of the shortage of skills, that we really need to know more about our people, know the skills that they have, know their interests. And I think, you know, from a framing perspective, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, Workquake, which is understanding where someone wants to go at the beginning of an employment relationship is a really great way to start thinking about this. And then committing to help them get to wherever it is that they want to go, if it also serves the best interest of the organization. You do this for me, I'm going to do this for you, and we're both going to hopefully wind up the better for it. And I think a technology system that can help, you know, maintain contact after we launch our employees out there into the world, I think is super, super valuable. LinkedIn is one. There aren't a ton out there right now. LinkedIn is one. I'm not here to say just because I helped build it that it's the best in the world, but I'm sure there are others, but that's an easy one. You don't have to build something new if you want to do that, and keeping that up, and then having some sort of rhythm of follow-up. We're going to do lunches. We're going to do webinars. We're going to do a newsletter. We're going to do reach outs. We're going to, you know, whatever that is, to keep that communication going. You know, and the difference between a school alumni and an organization is schools are usually wanting to do that to ask you for money.
Yeah.
and companies aren't necessarily, but something more valuable than money is your time and your insight and your impact to the organization.
As you say, I think I always say consistency of comms. If all you can do is an MVP, and Alyssa, you talked about consistency effectively, then consistency of comms is better than nothing. You know, to hear from you 5 times and then not hear from you for a year is absolutely, it's a known goal. Maybe, Alyssa, I can ask you a question, given that you have this presumably on your mind. I don't know, you'll tell me quite often, which is what advice would you give for people who want to create a standardized offboard process? So it's flexible enough to address some element of individual circumstances, so standardized, but also have some flexibility to say, you know, Steve, we know that you really want to be a truck driver. Let us help you on that next step. How do you do that with any scale? How are you doing that with any scale? Can you do it with any scale?
I hope so. I'm only at the beginning of this offboarding journey, but what I've realized is once you've spoken to people and once you've put back the human element at the center of offboarding and you've had those conversations, you realize that actually people need to hear from you. I had someone say he had left over the holidays, it was quite rushed, and he didn't know if he could be part of the network. I had stayed only 1 year. I wasn't sure if I was going to be seen as abusing or using the network. And my response to that was, I hope you use it and potentially abuse it. And that's a bet I'm going to make on you and the company's making on you, because hopefully when you're successful or down the line, you'll want to give back, right? And you'll create connections. So I think having really, really good conversations and human conversations and saying thank you, as we said before, will go a long way. And that will help you also, hopefully, whether it's you or HR or alumni services, be able to categorize your leavers. And I'm hoping some of our HR systems can do that, to send triggered messages. So we were talking before about people who had said yes to boomerangs. Can I send them a boomerang story at the right time for them to be inspired? So the triggered messages is one. Can we learn and act upon the data that we have, but also how does our global survey help us inform our EVP, right? What is our employee value proposition? What do we want to offer employees? And do we actually measure that when they leave so that we can act upon that? So those are a few things to start. You mentioned, Steve, LinkedIn. I think multi-channel is essential. We have a portal, we have a LinkedIn group, we have social media. Definitely need a lot of different channels for alumni to pay attention to us.
Yeah, different people like different things, right? We always say,
right.
I really believe that engagement is just such a thing I could personally talk about for about 5 days running without breathing. I mean, engagement really is just knowing who and where someone is and then receiving information, so that if in 3.5 years' time there's that one thing that they're like, yes, I really need that. For me, that's engagement. You don't need to have someone read your company website, every time you send an email out. I mean, it's lovely, but it doesn't achieve anything for the person you're trying to reach. So I totally agree with that. And I tell you, I saw a wonderful example of that point you made about people leaving in tricky times. COVID was obviously a moment of departure for people where no one can be celebrated. And Cleary Gottlieb had this amazing woman called Norma who worked for them for, I think it was 35 years, and she left during COVID. And she effectively had touched the sort of career of everybody that ever worked there, and all the managing partners and senior managing partners. And last year they made a dinner for her. I think it was a year or two at least after she left. And there were senior managing partners who all turned up and spent 4 or 5 hours at a dinner, which was a testament. And it was interesting because you sometimes forget, like, oh, it was just a dinner and let's put something together. But, demonstrably, it really mattered to her and it was really easy to do. So, again, that's the point about small things. And it made me, for example, even though I'm not an alumni, it made me feel warmer about the firm. We're also a customer of law firms. I saw that and I thought to myself, that is a firm I would really like to give my business to, because look how wonderful they are to long-standing employees who've made an impact. And look at the respect at the most senior level that people are giving to somebody that worked in the career and alumni department. So I think it doesn't just impact the people that want to work for you, it also impacts the people around you. I'm like, I clock that if I ever need to think about a new firm. Now, we've only really got a couple of minutes left. So I think I'm probably going to leave you with a couple of short fire questions. People like to measure things. Do you have any advice, and this is the question that we have here, for how companies can measure the effectiveness of offboarding? Are there metrics? Is there a feedback mechanism that can be used to evaluate and improve offboarding strategies? Do you have one good suggestion each about how you can measure these things? Steve?
I would suggest, that number one, are you retaining the information of your departing employees? Like that's number one. A lot of times when people are let go, they don't keep the information. And number two, I would do a survey saying, to the alumni, would you recommend us as a place of employment? Would you continue to recommend us? And try to keep it anonymous and have that be sort of an alumni net promoter score. That would be something that I'd want to know. And if the score is low, then I'd want to go talk to some people and say, well, why is that? What about the experience here makes you feel like that's something that you wouldn't want to engage in or you wouldn't want to keep in touch? Because then I know I've got some work to do.
And that NPS is so important. We'll often say, if someone gets a really high net promoter score, there's great things you can do with that. But if it's maybe a 3 or 4 or below, why not offer 10 minutes? with even if it is with a recruiter, why not offer saying 10 minutes? We'd really like to hear and learn from your feedback. That's super easy. And actually, I mean, that's what you pay people to, large sums of money to come in and talk to you about your culture or your workplace. It's absolutely invaluable. Thank you very much for that one, Steve. And Alyssa, one from you.
If I have to pick one, I'd say increase in engagement via the percentage of consent from leavers to receiver communication.
As in, to say, yes, I'd like to stay in touch with you.
Yeah, so our HR system feeds into our CRM, and we only send newsletters and event invites to people who have said, yes, I want to be part of your alumni network and I want to hear from you. I'm hoping that's going to increase in the coming months.
Yeah, that's a really good one. We look at that statistic across loads of alumni network a lot when we're making assumptions as we grow our business. And actually, it's remarkable. You know, there are companies where it's at like 5%, and there are companies where it's at like 70%. It does often suggest what's going on in a business. And last question for you both. So thinking of broader company culture, which is what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about company culture. We're talking about how everybody can have a really symbiotic relationship. How can companies ensure a smooth transition for the remaining team members after people leave, so people left behind? I always think when you think about offboarding, you've still got to remember that there are people there. Do you have any advice on that? And we've got a question on that from Sarah. Steve, one for you.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think ask yourself and try to recognize whether or not you have a culture where you can talk about, the pros and cons of someone leaving, and that's, is it a elephant in the room conversation, or is it like, wow, that's really going to hurt? Susan was really critical to this team and we're going to miss her. But let's appreciate that. So having a culture where those conversations can take place is really, really important. I've worked in places where when someone left, we didn't want to ask them why, because we knew why. The culture wasn't good, And so I think because hiring and retaining talent is so hard today, that it's really important you can talk about the hard and messy stuff. You've got to do that because you've got to find ways of improving and becoming a place where great people want to be. If you do that, if you create the culture where great people want to go, it relieves the pressure of you having to hunt people.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And Alyssa, any thought from you before we say some gracious goodbyes to everyone that's been listening, and I say some gracious goodbyes to you both?
I think the first one is acknowledging and recognizing people who are leaving. So office-wide meeting, thanking them, for example. And the second one is recognizing that we can't impact remaining employees. But just like you said, Emma, people will feel warm if they see other people are happier and cared about. And so making sure we look after that person leaving, making them a brand ambassador will, in my opinion, just make people feel more comfortable about people.
Is that possible with people that are either made redundant, asked to leave? Is that always possible, or is that just for people that have decided? Because obviously, to go to Steve's point about the beginning of LinkedIn, ultimately they used to wish people good luck on that. You're only here for a while. Let's make it rock for you, and then you go somewhere else. Bit hard when you're getting, making people redundant or they're not right for your team, isn't it? Tricky.
And I think that's where career support should step in, because I'm in consulting. It is a pyramid hierarchy, right? People will come into consulting and go on to other jobs to do great things. If we offer career support to help them, maybe that's one small step towards making people feel better.
Totally agree. Well, look, I want to bottle you both, but I don't think that's possible. I'm sure you've got better things to do with your time. So thank you for letting us bottle you for an hour. For everybody, in fact, Alyssa, maybe you can advertise Steve's book for him, seeing as I know you've got a copy on a desk. I've got one in the office library. There we go. For anyone that wants to read more, there we go. Yeah, I mean, it's all in there, right? So certainly Alyssa and I have read it. So great source of advice. Thank you both for joining us. Super helpful. Really thoughtful. Thank you to everyone for the questions. I know we didn't get through all of them, but we covered most of the topics. And look forward to our next webinar and for everybody joining us again soon. Thank you both.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.